Okay, so we are an interdisciplinary group, and I'm Alison from the iSchool, the Information Studies Department at Northumbria. I'm a historian and increasingly a digital historian. And I'm going to lead us into this presentation, and then Gemma's going to take over. Gemma is a human-computer interaction person, and David's here as well, who might help with questions. And human geographer, is that the best description? And Hai couldn't be with us today, and he's a computer scientist. So that's who we are. So we are part of your outreach group. So we're funded not by your original network, but by Semantic Media. And in a nutshell, POWKist is about investigating how best to capture, collate and curate, and then to connect and share the contents of citizen historians, micro collections, affectionately known as shoebox collections. And we want to do this in an accessible and sustainable manner, because this has been difficult, it's a problem, it needs solving, and that's what we're trying to do. We're very much a pilot study. We have seed funding, and so please see this as a work in progress as well. We began loosely August 2014. We have to spend our money by the end of February, but we do envision ourselves continuing beyond that date, and hope to work things up towards a larger grant application. So, within our endeavours to best digitise community and family micro collections, we are using the Curios platform. Gemma's going to talk about that in more detail later, which is effectively an open source digital archive. And we've digitised a case study collection relating to a prisoner of war in the Second World War. And what else do we need to say up there? And in part of the connecting and sharing side of what we want to do, we want to explore the potential of linked data. You may or may not have heard of this. We have a whole slide devoted to this later, but it basically provides an opportunity to connect content within one website with content in another data set somewhere else if it's created in a certain format. So it's a way of linking together information in an archive to what else is out there on the net. So that's what we're trying to do. There are problematics with that specific to cultural heritage data sets and metadata in particular. So that's something we really want to explore and we think is innovative. These are our research questions. I'm not going to read through them in detail, but just to summarise that we want to, if we look at point 3, in particular, the core of what we're trying to do is to develop our visualisation system using our case study. But we want to not just digitise the contents, but we want to make it attractive to the users, and we also want to work on the effective navigation of the contents, and we want to enrich it with this linked data business. And then sandwiching that academically, we obviously want to explore our methodology to systematically visualise things, but also to think about the impacts of all of this for our citizen historians at a grassroots level, and how they can and do contribute to the broader historical narrative and record. They're actually very keen as a group, if we can generalise, to digitise, and have been doing for a long time, but because there's a limit to what they can do with sustainable software. It's a sustainability issue, and of course accessibility and affordability. That there is a hole that projects tend to fall into after a period of time has passed, and we need to address that and see how we can make something much more sustainable. We knew before we set off that there were issues around the decisions and ethics of sharing and not sharing things that were in collections. And that's become even more interesting when we've had our user groups and some of the conversations that we've had with people about what they want to include and what they don't want to include, because they perhaps want a more sanitised visual telling of their antecedent story. So just to tell you a little bit more about the collection itself. So on the ground we want to digitise, preserve and display, and on a headline level we want to create a way in which heritage groups, communities and just individuals can remain in control of their collection. There are lots of reasons why people don't necessarily want to hand over their collections to memory institutions or broader projects, And sometimes they don't want the project to be subsumed in a much larger story. So we're looking at how people can have standalone collections and yet connect when people want to. So in this particular collection, it relates to Trooper Alan Houston. He was in the 3rd British Tank Regiment and unfortunately spent most of the war in various prisoner of war camps. His shoebox collection, actually kept in a cigar box, so it has a somewhat faint aroma now, I think it's known now. But contains all sorts of letters, photographs and official papers. It covers all 3 camps that he was in, which initially he was in Camp 66, which was a transit camp in Capua near Naples in Italy. He then moved to Camp 53. Paul Bullard was also in Camp 53, and this he painted on his return after the war. It was a very overcrowded camp. It began with about 4,000 people at the beginning of the war, ended with about 7,000, so it was very cramped conditions. And at the core of the collection is a brilliant pencil-written, tiny script diary relating to his time in this camp. That's been a challenge to digitise, but so we're very pleased about that. Also in this collection are photographs, newspaper articles, songs, all sorts of things like that. So it's a really lovely collection. Maps, official documentation. Now there are so many more collections like this that are fragile and degrading in shoeboxes and other such containers, in the back of garages and attics and stuffed in the back of bureaus. Obviously we need to protect those, we need to digitise those, we need to provide a means of doing that at a grassroots level. And as an extension of that, some projects that, some collections that have already been digitised are also very fragile, and there's a tendency for people to think that once they've digitised it once, it's preserved forever. And of course it isn't, because even digitised things degrade and fall into the abyss. And then the original documentation is then even more at risk. There tends to be a lack of connection between these personal stories, and so we want to address that too. So, what we're looking at here is jigsaw pieces in the lived experiences of people involved in major national and international events. So these are all unconnected jigsaw pieces, and we want to connect them to the historical record and make them available to other people to learn from. And within this we want to explore the promise of linked data and how this might be used to reconnect these jigsaw pieces of history online. And whilst there have been lots of well, not lots, but some larger scale projects, those two you might have heard of, the TNA's First World War Army Diary projects, that's been big news recently. There's an older project that was in 2006, the BBC's People's War. That was a more sort of text-based telling of your relative stories. There's lots of little projects going on at grassroots level, and I suppose we're contributing to that, but trying to create something more academic with it as well, where we can analyse the methodologies, etc. Yeah, and within that it's really important to give weight to the challenge of linked data for cultural heritage. So I'm not going to ramble any more on that, I'm going to pass you over to Gemma to give you some specifics on Curios.
So the Curious is a wider project which is the cultural repositories and information systems. And the Curious project's supposed aim was how to create digital archives for rural community heritage groups that can be made more sustainable. So in particular, how do we make these groups able to maintain a lasting digital presence? So not something that, as some groups have said, is for now and then it kind of drops off into the abyss. So they create a website and then something happens and their funding runs out and they have no money to maintain this website anymore and it just stops. So how can we do this in a way that is sustainable and lasts for the group? So what we've done is we've developed an open source software tool called Curious, which promotes open data standards and open source software for producing and consuming cultural heritage data. So it's a way that not only displays the data, but also allows the groups to produce it collaboratively together. So very quickly, I'll say what linked data is, but if anyone has very technical questions, I can go into more detail at the end. So linked data is a set of best practices to publish structured data online. And it's a best practices to allow the data to be able to be reused and reintegrated in different ways and with different collections. So for instance, in the POWKist project, having data in a linked data format has allowed us to start making a prototype mobile tourist application for one of our cultural heritage groups. So that their data that they've already produced doesn't need to be repackaged, they don't need to rewrite it, it can just be used in this mobile app in a way that's sustainable. It also allows data to be connected to other sources. So for instance, if there are multiple groups that do research around similar areas and they cross over at a point, the data can be linked rather than copied and pasted and taken. And with that link there, if one group updates their information, it updates another information rather than just taking bulk copies of the data that then itself becomes out of date. It also allows us to pull in data from other places. So for instance, Wikipedia is all linked data and has a system called DBpedia. So if there's general information around a specific event in the war, you can pull that in to add context to your collection without a group having to reproduce it, redo it. Now we are aware that there are metadata issues in this area, and we're exploring both the positive and negative issues around this, and anybody else who's working in this area and has feedback about this, it'd be great to have a conversation. So progress to date on this project. So it's important to note that the shoebox collection we've got is actually quite extensive. There's 40 plus objects and items within this collection, each of them needing to be digitised and transcribed. The diary had, I think, 60 plus pages, all handwritten, tiny text, very fragile, needing properly photographed. So we've managed to finally get the whole collection digitised in very good high quality. We have created the basic Curious, which we're now calling the archive view of the system, and we've run a workshop with users. So the workshop in particular was run to understand how close are the goals of family historians and archivists in narrating and building story around an archive. So we really wanted to understand this difference. So we met with a family historian group, which was the Manchester and Lancashire Family History Society, and then we also repeated the same process with archivists from the Aberdeen City Archives and Library Services, and we conducted some investigative activities to understand how both groups would narrate the archive, how they would contextualise the information from the archive, and also how they would explore the archive. And then we had an open discussion around issues related to sort of archives and cultural heritage data and how it can be presented and used and misrepresented. So some of the findings we found from this is that although both groups have differences, there's also some strong similarities. So one of the first things that was very clear was that it was as important to family historians as it was to archivists to have accurate, true information. You know, they wanted to know if they were looking online, where did that person get their source, where did that date of birth came from, so that they can ensure that their family tree, their family history was as accurate and true as they possibly could. And this was something that the archivists said as well was obviously very important to them. Family historians also had quite an interesting thing about fear of scooping up and misrepresentation of their data. So one of the people gave an example in the group of some of these websites that you can join and you can put your family trees on, people just pinning that, oh, that relative is my relative, and taking their family tree into theirs, when they then did the research and said, well, that's not actually your relative, that's not who should be in your tree. And some people didn't care about this. So that was something. They also were saying things about how they really do want to trust what it is, like they treat transcriptions with a pinch of salt. But they also wanted to share it. You know, they don't want to just collect it and put it in a box and then it like that goes then into the back of a drawer and gets forgotten. But they also wanted to make it, it's not necessarily a story, but they wanted to have more information around the archive to help other members of the family or in the future understand what the experience of that family member was actually like. Archivists were similar. You know, they wanted to have the archive and have the archive full, but they also wanted to be able to tell the story around an archive. And I think the main difference between the two groups was that it's almost a packaging of it. So archivists said that they wanted to have the archive and they wanted to know what was purely the archive, but then they would also maybe put some other information at either side of it, but make it clear that was different. Whereas family historians would weave the information to make it more of a story. So very quickly, I will give a super quick demo of the website. So this is the very basic archive with the query system. So from here you can see that we can search for a person. So if we search for Alan, we found all references to Alan that are currently in the system. So if we pick to view Alan, oh, here we go. We can see from here that there's information about Alan. So there's a description section which is free text that the community groups can just type in what they want. There's then very formal information that's around, like, you know, record type, sex, date of birth. You can have images, videos, sound files attached. You can view these through the archive. The benefits now of linked data is that you can now link to other records that are related. So these are all ones that are things. For instance, we can go to his diary. So we have a main record about the diary as a whole and a description of where the diary was from. Again, images of the front, back cover, things like this about the diary. We also can then have links to individual pages within the diary, so like has page 1, page 2, so you can read through the diary if you wanted. From here we can see that he was had a letter from his father sent to himself, so you can actually link to this and see again a description of the letter from his father, photos of the letter all the way through. You can actually go to more information about the photos, which here shows you the typed transcription of it alongside the image for people who might not trust your transcription. You can then also link to information that may not be from it. So this is information about the camp where the diary was written or the letter was sent to, but this information was pulled in from another website through like the linked data source. So in conclusion, this is very much a work in progress. We would like feedback things. So we're now looking at how do we visualize, how do we add the layers to this archive. So we've got the full, like say, the archive, pure, this is what the information is, this is where it comes from. But how do we visualize the story or the exhibition of the collection? This collection is part of the important every day of archives. You know, it's the every man, as somebody described in one of the workshops. We need to preserve the integrity of the archive and its material. We don't want to take away from the collection in itself by adding information that's not relevant. We need to finish it up. We need to fully finish the complete data entry with all the different things and the visualizations. And we're also thinking about adding a second case study. And that's it.